podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
All right, Wayne, we've seen Spurs 2, United 2, the proverbial game of two halves. Sense of deja vu here with what happened against Sevilla. It's very, very, very similar. United completely in control and did their very, very best to throw it away.
Yeah, we are here to provide the finest analysis on the interwebs, as you just said before we came on. And I wanted to repeat it because it was such a good line. It was similar, but we have fewer excuses this time round, unfortunately. There are a few glaring things that we're going to have to address and talk about, which we can't sweep under the carpet and just say, oh, Martinez got carried off and a few dodgy decisions in there. No, this one is completely on the players. And I was an hour ago thinking, do you know what? After the abject disappointment of last week, this is going to be a fairly positive podcast to be on, and now it's feeling... I'm still fairly positive because I don't think the result was that bad, but unfortunately we are going to have to pick the bones out of some pretty bad things.
Well, yeah, we are. So let's start with the obvious place to start. Harry Maguire, it's all his fault. What the hell was he doing? No. Just replay all the greatest hits here.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. I mean, I'm not sure you could pin either of the goals on Luke Shaw at all. In fact, he was having a fine game for most of it. There's just a collective lack of will, effort, tactical nous in that second half. I mean, we've seen so one Casemiro was poor again, and I think he has been for a few games in a row now.
That's fair.
I'm not quite sure what I can pin it on, but he's not the Casemiro that we saw earlier this season, and Eriksen can't last more than an hour, and United have nobody who can come into the midfield and control the game quite like he does. And although, to be fair, United were bad from about minute 46 onwards, so it's not just about the change with Eriksen, but that was part of it. I'm really struggling. I wish I could just kind of go, what is it about United in these second halves, and especially away from home, that is leading them to drop off? Is it a lack of confidence? Is it a lack of fitness? Is it they just go into their shell because they still don't believe? They're not able to kill teams off in the way that they really should have done with a Spurs side whose confidence should be absolutely destroyed.
Yeah. No, I think it's fair to have those thoughts. What I will say is, in wanting to give something of a caveat, we were missing a few players. I mean, the heart of defence is missing, and that's as big a caveat as you're going to get from me with that, because by and large, we were taking on a team low on confidence and who were suspect and vulnerable themselves, and we should have been seeing that they were there for the taking. On the other side, you would also be expecting a response from them, especially considering they're at home and they've suffered one of, if not the most humiliating result in their history. I mean, ironically enough, I think they even lost heavier than that at Newcastle. They lost 7-1 in the 90s, I think. But it wasn't as humiliating as that because of the flurry of goals at the start. So you were going to see a response. And Spurs have been abject, but they do have a lot of quality. Now, it sounds like I'm making excuses for United. I think what went wrong in the second half, and this is just my analysis or my thoughts of this half an hour after the final whistle, I think what went wrong in the second half was a mixture of bad substitutes. I think we made the wrong substitutes. I think bad's maybe a strong word for it. Wrong substitutes at the wrong time. And we've got a combination of players who, and this may be critical in the running, I think we are now... We were just saying, the last thing we said before we came on air wasn't a bad result. It was a bad performance, but it wasn't a bad result. Based on the context of the way that the league shaped up in the last week, And the fact that 4 points from either of these two games, 4 points like against Spurs and Villa, would be fairly comfortable for us in terms of navigating the rest of the season. And I think we have a combination of players, and maybe some of them played tonight, where they know that, and we are in a bit of a comfort zone, and the difference between third and fourth, which is realistically what we're aiming for, the difference between third and fourth doesn't matter much to them. So on a game-by-game basis, it's not affecting our game as much as it should be, whereas the big difference that Ten Hag has tried to impress upon the players with this stringent policy of playing as strong a team as he can throughout every competition. Now he can't do that. I think now we're seeing the consequence of it, because we're seeing a few players in there who don't understand and perhaps never suffered the consequences of highs and lows, the bipolar Manchester United of the last 6 years, because they're still in and around the squad. And so it doesn't matter to them if we relinquish a 2-0 lead at Spurs, because it's still a decent result at the end of the day. Nobody's head's going to be put on the chopping block for it. And ultimately, in the long game, it doesn't really matter that much. Now, I suspect that's not the message that Ten Hag will be thinking about, because I think that
it won't be. Yeah.
Exactly. He'll be feeling fairly ruthless about it. So if I want to be really positive about this, I could say it's a good kick up the backside for the manager, like Brighton was, like Sevilla was, in a way that you can look at these players and say, I'm finding out the answers that I need to. Don't get me wrong, Sevilla was costly, but in terms of the long-term benefits of what that competition was going to bring, it was meant to bring Champions League football. So if we get it through the league, the cup embarrassment comes with a kind of like a collateral consequence of something that's fairly positive, in a way that it makes up the manager's minds on a few of these players. And I'm not saying that we didn't know these answers already, but what I'm talking about is in a situation where we generally feel that we're fairly comfortable in the Champions League spot. If we do get there, then these performances will be definitive. Don't get if it costs us a Champions League, we're here at the end of the season having a completely different conversation. I'm just trying to take a positive out of this, looking at it thinking these are bad individual and collective performances in some respects, but when you put it against the bigger picture, maybe it's a decent time to have them.
I mean, look, it's totally fine 2-2 draw, given the United are 6 points ahead of Spurs. There's a couple of games in hand. Totally fine, of course. It's just that United 2-0 up against a side that shipped 6 the previous week, are on their second interim manager of the year, and really could have been ruthless and just took their foot off the gas, even just before half-time. And then came out. And I wasn't even sure that Spurs made a real tactical change until Richarlison went off and Kulusevski came on about the hour, and then they had an extra man in midfield. It's not like they really made a change. This was a team there for the taking that is not in a good place. Ryan Mason said before the game, we have to be pragmatic. And so they went to 3 at the back. It didn't really help them, did it? And so the frustration is that United eased off or allowed Spurs back in. And I think it really was that more than Mason going in there and throwing teacups around or something and getting a reaction out of Spurs. This is a team whose confidence clearly looked totally destroyed in that first half. You can't suddenly stick something in the halftime orange juice or whatever and make it magically better when the team's confidence is that shot. I think United just stepped off, and then, of course, the fatigue crept in. I mean, we really are going to have to find a solution next season to an alternative to Eriksen. Just because the drop-off when you bring Fred or Scott or Sabitzer on in terms of the ability to control the game is just huge. Yeah. And Ten Hag took some pelters on social media for the changes. I mean, I don't even blame him, really. He needed to inject some impetus into the game. I guess he assumed that Fred would be able to give that through his energy, and Fred had an absolute mare. He came on and just started giving the ball away. which they all then caught. But
Yeah.
there was a period for about 15 minutes in the early part of that second half where they just couldn't pass to each other. And then towards the end of the game, and we got away with it because Spurs had some good opportunities in that second half. Towards the end of the game, they kept going back to Dave, and I was just like, he's going to scuff one of these. And somehow he didn't. I was just like, my God, you're asking for trouble here. Somehow got away with it because we really could have lost that second half. I mean, they had two great chances before they scored. Yeah. And then obviously they scored the two, and that's worrying. It's really worrying. And you look how City are playing at the moment, and that cup final's there, and I'm like, oh my God, this could be. We desperately need to win that FA Cup final, don't we? Because City are going to bloody win the league. They're the best team left in the Champions League. And we need to find a solution. And you were saying, well, maybe they're dropping off because it feels quite secure. And realistically, they shouldn't blow the top four now. But shouldn't they be looking at that cup final and going, we want a spot in that side? Or maybe there's just not enough competition because they all know that the drop off from the first 11 to what comes after that is too big.
Yeah, I think you make a good point. Overall, if you're talking about a squad that we perhaps don't know, but we do know this squad, and I don't think that a single game or the enticement of a cup final means that much to them in isolation, particularly one against Manchester City. I don't think, for example, and I'm not calling Martial for a bad performance, I'm talking about his general sort of demeanour and attitude and what we know of him from the 8 years. Do you think? Well, this is rhetorical. I'm not asking you for a response. All listeners, by the way, I know what the response is going to be: universal and very quick. Do you think that the enticement of a Manchester City Cup final is going to be the thing that Martial's? Oh, do you know what? I really need to be a part of that, considering how we played against Brighton on Sunday, and considering how strangely out of sorts he seems to be in a team that's pretty much set up to get the best out of a player like him, and he's not the only one. Like I said, there are plenty of other players that you can point the finger at through willingness or through it. I don't want to say ineptitude. I don't mean that. It was a word that was falling out of my mouth, but what I mean is not being good enough. And I'm not as I'm just checking the date, April 27th. I'm not as concerned about the cup final as you are yet, because I do think this is a Fitz and Spurs kind of team. And I think that a run of 2 or 3 games can change the way that this team feels in especially this season, in buoyancy and mood. That we know we had an abject performance against Sevilla, but you have a penalty win after a 0-0 against Brighton, and it suddenly felt a lot more like there was a spring in the step going into this game, even though theoretically it shouldn't have been. It should have been like, oh God, that was a bit flat. But it did feel like a spring in the step. And the reason why is because Ten Hag's brought that factor back, and we did play a lot better against Brighton, and we never, even against a vibrant front line, we never looked like giving too many chances away. So you go into tonight's game thinking, all right, we shouldn't be as porous as the back as we have been, and then that second half comes in, and I do. There's a part of me that really does put it down to this comfort zone thing. I don't want to give Spurs too much credit, because I think what you were saying there about the vulnerability of the team, I do think that that's fair, and I do think that it's right. One thing I would say about it is that when you're looking at United to be clinical, and I think when it was 1-0, 5 minutes before half time, everyone was like, do you know what? We need a second goal here, because we are toying with them a little bit, but we need that second goal. So you get the second goal like we did, and all of a sudden you're thinking, well, United have got a second goal now. They've got a buffer. And you're not thinking of the third goal, really. You're not. But the way that they started the second half, immediately you were thinking, United need that third goal. And you shouldn't be thinking like that about a team at that level. I mean, yeah, all right, you do get comebacks and stuff like that, but you shouldn't have a team that's so vulnerable that they can get 2 goals in front. Because really, I was going to message you at some point in the second half when they were coming back, and I was going to say, Ed, what a good title for the podcast is Lads, It's United. You know, like, because
Ouch.
because it would have been a good one. That's the spoiler alert. Like, so we've used that title even though we didn't lose. Right, by the way. So, because I've dropped it in there, so you don't use that as the title because that would be pretty bad. But do you know what I'm saying is that like
No, completely, yeah.
We have become, unfortunately, we've become that sort of hybrid of Arsenal and Spurs that we mocked for a long period of time. And don't get me wrong, I feel like we're on the progression out of it. But as soon as a team like Spurs, who have been feeling vulnerable and they do feel like they might be able to get a way back into the game, they can sense a vulnerability in United. Now, I do want to keep adding this little caveat that we didn't have the central defence, and they do have a top-class attack. I know Son and Kane plugged away for a long time. Son was abject in the first half. He was fantastic in the second. As we know, he can't be. He was like a completely different player, by the way. And as soon as they brought off Richarlison, it looked like, well, they're looking like they're going to actually threaten instead of argue all the time. But yes, it does come back to how United were controlling the first half, and you say, all right, well, 2-0 should have been enough, but yeah, they should have been 3-0. They should have been 4-0. And do you know what? I'm going to give them a little bit more slack because when it was 2-1, Fernandes went through. His play was absolutely exceptional. He should have made it 3-1, and that would have probably killed the game off.
Probably, yeah. And on these moments, games are won and lost, or drawn in this case. We haven't even talked about any of the goals. I mean, it started off so well for United, and Sancho, who always thinks looks better with Fernandes and Eriksen in the team. They just seem to understand him well and what he brings. It was a really nice finish for the first goal. And you can see what it meant to his teammates as well. Everyone is willing him to be good.
Yeah.
He seems like a nice lad. He's obviously been through a tough time. We want to get the best out of him. We know he's better than this. And it was a great finish. That's what he can do.
He made a decision. He made it. Like, he got the ball and he went, do you know what? This is what I'm going to do. Eriksen did make that goal for him in a certain way because you could see him sort of, he had the ball, he's moving with it. It's like, what do I do? And Eriksen made that goal for him because he made the space in a way that sometimes Luke Shaw, for as brilliant as he's been this season, Luke Shaw can take the road into the middle too often, and it leaves Sancho isolated on the wide side of the left.
Right.
So as brilliant as Shaw has been, and he has been, and you say, is it worth Shaw being that good for Sancho being a passenger sometimes? Yeah, I guess sometimes, yeah, it has been worth it because the progression of the team as a whole and Shaw as an individual sort of bites that, and it's up to Sancho to step up. But you saw what can happen if there's movement around that player, and this is what we've talked about a few times on this podcast, is about the selflessness of players, and I don't think a lot of our players have got that, but Eriksen certainly does. Bruno does to an extent, actually. He's good at making intelligent off-the-ball runs if he can see the picture of something that's happening. But by and large, we don't have many of those players who make those kind of selfless runs. So as soon as you have someone like Eriksen who understands that his in-game intelligence is so superior to most other players, I'm not taking any of the credit away from Sancho because he was incisive and deliberate and he took that opportunity very well.
Which we want to see from him, don't we?
Exactly, yeah. And we've talked about his sort of plan A and plan B, and is what I have, and his reluctance to use a plan B and always go back to a plan A. So to see him just come in and do something like we saw so many times that he did for Dortmund, and maybe that's a case of other players stepping up to the plate, and literally just one off-the-ball run makes Sancho look like a completely different player. And I hope that that's something that Ten Hag picks up in like his next session, shows a video of that goal and just says, look, everyone's got this responsibility. I'm not saying that it absolves Sancho of everything. What I'm saying is, in this case, look what happens if one of you runs around. It creates a lot of play,
creates a bit of space for him.
Yeah, for him to actually do something, which we know that.
And he's a really good finisher as well. I mean, he was scoring double figures, 15, 16 goals a season for Dortmund.
Yeah,
he is a really good finisher. And give him that space, and he is going to score goals. I've been stunned at how few goals he's scored for United, really, given how good he is. But that was great. And then the second one, I mean, even better in a way. It's just Bruno. Like if you watch him, he somehow digs the ball out from under his feet and plays this 60-yard pass into space. And Rashford got Romero isolated Romero, who spent most of the game trying to pick a fight with people. At one point, he tried to pick a fight with Wout Weghorst. I'm not sure you're going to win this one, mate. Got really in his face. I mean, he is, to bastardize the quote, he could start fighting in an empty room, couldn't he, that guy?
Yeah.
But Rashford isolated him, and the great thing about Rashford in this kind of form, and especially with the ball in front of him, it doesn't matter, left foot, right foot, this was left foot. He could have gone either way, and Romero he was twisted blood, wasn't he? Trying to work out which way Rashford was going to go, and another great finish as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Really, really good goals.
Yeah, I thought it was a fantastic take, and I think Rashford he'd had one opportunity earlier where he couldn't get the ball out of his feet, or maybe it come to him on the off turn and he just couldn't sort of spin quick enough. But that one, yeah, like I said, he got the space and he did so well to sort of manipulate it and fairly brave as well. I mean, sometimes you might think it's with our players, if they take on a decision that looks as brave as that and then finishes with conviction, but if they don't finish, you say it's foolish or wasteful. Do you know what I mean? A player doing something that they're not normally renowned for. But he did really well and finished with the kind of confidence that maybe you might not have expected of Rashford, considering he's gone 4 games without a goal. So it was nice to see him. You know what I mean? Like, you don't want to see the shoulders drop. That we're all watching all the time. Like Rashford, for all the goals and the way that he's played. I mean, look, I'm on a podcast with Paul Parker every week, not name dropping, but Paul says every week like he's not convinced about Marcus's form. And I'm inclined to mostly agree with him in terms of the way that he plays without the goals. Like, sometimes you look at him and you think, well, yeah, there's not much to argue against. It doesn't look like a big threat when he's not scoring. He's not inflicting that much damage. He's not a constant threat. But then when he does score the goals, it's hard to, like against Betis, and it's 1-0 away, and it's a magnificent goal. It's hard to argue against his productivity. What I'm saying is, like tonight, obviously, there's no argument against that because he scores an absolute thunderbolt of a goal.
It's 29 for the season across all competitions. I think it's something like 40 goal contributions, if you goals and assists. And I may be slightly off on my numbers there, but something like that. It's a great return. It's a really great return, and he was even doing number 9 things for a while there. Back to goal, turning, spinning, bringing other players into play. I mean, it's not a real stretch to say maybe he's a little better at that than Wout Weghorst even. He came on and, didn't do a lot. Poor Wout.
Yeah, like I said, I don't think the subs were great. And if there's one thing... at the start of the season, when we were tracking every tiny decision that Ten Hag was making, it was like sort of micro-analysis of like, it got to the point where it's every single substitute. Is he doing this right? Is he doing that right? The timing of them, the timing, the exact naming of the selection, and where and how he was naming the players, all that sort of stuff. We were analysing it and saying, has he made an error there? Has he done something bad there? And all of the time up until the return of the league and all that sort of stuff, we were sort of saying, well, he hasn't really made maybe 1 or 2 errors that he rotated the side against Sociedad, and you would have thought maybe he shouldn't have done that. And yeah, I just think maybe tonight, well, the last couple of weeks, you could have questioned the subs sometimes, the timing of them, the way that like 2 players would come on at once and it disrupt the rhythm, and you give some kind of leeway with that, with the fact that we've had such a busy calendar and he has to make the changes at some point. It just feels that when he's done it, it's been at a pivotal time when there could have been like an extra 5 or 10 minutes, and would that extra 5 or 10 minutes really have cost us in that moment, considering the fact that in those 5 or 10 minutes, let's say Sevilla at home, if you'd just waited an extra 5 or 10 minutes to kill the sting, take the sting out of the game, don't bring Bruno off, because he wasn't going to play in the next game. I forget the other player that he brought off at the time, but it might have been Anthony, or Anthony came off just a little bit later. Just don't bring them off. Just give them a little bit longer. Is it that 5 or 10 minutes going to make such a critical difference in the... Now it's made a critical difference to the complexity of the season because we're out of the Europa League. Would it have made a big difference on night? yes, in terms of, I think it would have given us more of a threat that Sevilla didn't feel emboldened to come on to us. I'm not really wanting to go over that game so much, but what I'm talking about is like games like tonight. You take Eriksen off, you're bringing Fred on, you are losing composure of the ball in the middle, and it immediately emboldens Spurs to think, all right, we've got something that we can go at here. And don't get, like, maybe like I said...
I think I understand why he makes that change, because Eriksen flags after 60 minutes, and I guess he's thinking it's the physicality of United's midfield that was failing. Yeah. But actually, it turns out when we saw the rest of the game, it was also the lack of control that was a problem, and maybe he got that wrong. Maybe it was Sabitzer would have been a better choice there because he has just that little better balance with the ball. But we're second guessing stuff for the most part. We can say that Ten Hag has got most things right, and he is constantly trying to compromise with the squad that is not as good as we'd like it to be. I mean, it's a deep squad in terms of just how much money has been spent on it, but it's not a deep squad in terms of the quality we'd like. And we see that when we get a few injuries and suspensions and he can't get his perfect team together. I mean, it's a compromise from the start, isn't it? Because Eriksen's come in as a number 8 and pretty much never played as number 8 before in his life. So, and I mean, he certainly didn't do that at Brentford last season, didn't do it at Inter. He was basically a forward at Spurs. So, yes, lots and lots of compromises, and Ten Hag is trying to navigate his way through it. And of course, we question him when it doesn't quite work out. I'm not sure. The 2-2 versus Sevilla at home, I think a lot of that was on Ten Hag.
Yeah.
I think he got that one wrong. Tonight, I'm not sure. I mean, was Anthony having such a good game that you couldn't take him off? No, I don't think so. Was Eriksen likely to flag? Probably. So it's hard to say it would have changed completely if he'd made slightly different substitutions here or there. I'm more looking at those players and going, how can you drop your level? Let your level drop so much against a broken opposition?
Yeah, he wasn't like it was a brilliant Spurs comeback. Don't get me wrong. I mean, in terms of like being 2-0 down and 2-2, it was a great comeback. But in terms of their performance, they were still vulnerable at the back. They still showed that sign. And if United had been a little bit more clinical or a little bit less lackadaisical in the play, if they'd have shown a little bit more composure in that second half, and you're quite right. I mean, I've been Casemiro's biggest fan, and he's been pretty poor since he came back, and tonight was no different. I thought Eriksen was probably one of the better players until he started to sort of tire a bit. I don't think we've seen the consequences of that. I just think it's naturally assumed, Eriksen's getting a bit knackered, better bring him off. I don't think we've seen, you know what I mean, the consequences as to say, would another 5 or 6 minutes of Eriksen have been worse than another 5 or 6 minutes more of Fred? But
well, true.
But you know, this is the management that we're dealing with at the moment. In terms of, I'm not pointing the finger at Ten Hag saying he made a mistake. I'm just saying he's learning about his squad, and these are the decisions that he's going to be making. And to return to the very original point I was making about this could be, it's a bad result. Or it's a decent result in terms of the league. It's a bad result in terms of where they've been playing and the way that they've been playing and the results that they've been getting and the vulnerability that they've been showing. It's not necessarily a bad result in terms of it being a reminder. I'm not saying we need a million reminders of the players and what they can and can't do, but I think it probably doesn't do Ten Hag a massive disservice to have reminders of that going into the summer, the closer that we get to the end of the league.
I'm
season.
Sure he's going to have a really clear idea about how he'd like to change the squad. Maybe that's a good segue to talk about some other stuff this week, unless you have any other thoughts on the game. I mean, Ten Hag after the game called it a good draw, which, bigger context, it really is. I mean, the idea that Spurs can make up 6 points on us, they got 5 games, so we got 7, seems unlikely. Unlikely. So,
decent
in that context, yeah. And obviously, he was disappointed in the second half performance. I don't think he used those words, but. The squad makeup for next season is going to depend a lot on the takeover. There's been some developments this week. hasn't there, with, well, two reports. One, that final bids are expected and preferred bidder may be named as early as next week. And that will be on the basis of one, Joel and Avram's ego, and two, how much money the bidders are offering them. I guess I'm not sure in which order is most important to these guys. And then the other interesting bit of news was, it seems to be that Ratcliffe, Ineos, and I'm just reading between the lines of various reports, no insider knowledge at all here, are prepared to offer the Gimps an opportunity to stay at the club, not in a controlling capacity, but in some kind of equity ownership, maybe up to 20%. It couldn't be much more than that. Otherwise, they'd have a controlling number of shares in terms of the vote. So, which I'm going to say won't go down well with fans, particularly to have them hanging around like a bad smell in a lift.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. I can't pretend that I know as much as you about it. I read fleetingly there was something to do with Class B shares and the power of shares and stuff like that. And
the Class B have 10 times the voting rights. So the Glazer family own 69% of the shares and have 90-something% of the voting rights. And as soon as they're sold, they convert to Class A. Not the good kind of Class A, folks. This kind of Class A. And sorry. I can hear Paul's eyes rolling in the back of his head.
Have you got a sound effect for it?
I should have, shouldn't I?
Rolling in.
Normally it's a dad joke about, anyway, whatever. So yes, that's why the sort of 20% equity would be about the max that the Glazers could retain while not retaining control. No one's going to come in and leave them in control while having 24% of the equity. Absolutely nobody. That'd be mental. And so look, if that doesn't preclude them being bought out at some other point, and it doesn't mean that the debt remains, although I kind of, there's a question mark for me there if they have a significant equity stake. Well, we'll see. And it probably means, aside from a state bid, that to redevelop the stadium or build a brand new one, that debt would come from the public market. It's not a bad thing necessarily. If you look at what Spurs have done with their stadium, it can be like taking out a mortgage. You're building an asset that can drive additional revenue. So I'm not going to say debt is bad.
Yeah.
Like neutrally, like it depends what kind of debt. So anyway, there's all these dynamics happening. It seems like we've got the state of play is Qatar. We've not heard from them for a long time. They were briefing like every 3 seconds previously, have not been doing that. It's kind of not sure what to say about that. Changes on the Ineos bid, leaving the Glazers an opportunity to retain some part of the club. And then we think there's at least 2 private equity firms, maybe 3 actually, who are prepared to give the Glazers some kind of minority purchase where they buy out the other 4 kids and they leave the Glazers probably with controlling stake of 25 to 30% equity in the club, gives them more than 50% of the voting rights. And that would be okay because the structure of the deal, if it's private equity, would give those private equity bidders some kind of preferential or performance warrants, which would trigger both returns on their equity in terms of effectively an interest rate, or protections against dilution, or triggers in terms of financial performance of the club and so on. So classic private equity model. So anyway, none of these things are good, by the way.
No.
Really?
No, I would say, and not that this is good or positive, but there was a period before the Glazers took over where Malcolm Glazer had a substantial amount of shares. And obviously that was a progression towards the takeover.
Yeah.
But he wasn't owner of the club. And
no. It was quite disruptive, actually, wasn't it, at that time, where they had different factions fighting?
No, yeah, absolutely. But what I'm saying is it was still a percentage of time where that happened. And yes, it was unsettling. It was an unsettling period because it was building towards the takeover, and that was what the end goal was. That's obviously not going to be the case this time around. I don't pretend to know that much about the circumstances around the takeover with the debt, whether or not the terms of any takeover would require. I've read some things where they were saying that if Ineos took over or if Ratcliffe took over, that there's an obligation in there that the debt by virtue of the takeover is not necessarily extinguished. I don't mean that, but like it's sort of passed on to a third party and it's refinanced and all that sort of stuff. So it doesn't.
Well, I would say that they will almost certainly retire the current debt and leverage elsewhere.
Yeah,
I would almost certainly guarantee that. And I actually think I've seen. I mean, we did a previous pod with Andy Green on this, just to clarify again. My reading of that is you'd expect to see some leverage on Ineos' side, not because they can't afford it. It's a €60 billion a year company, and Ratcliffe has got let's call it £15 billion worth of wealth. You can certainly afford it, but it's cheaper. It's just you leave cash and you use that cash for day-to-day operations and you leverage elsewhere. I think it's a very, very, very different kind of debt, the debt the Glazers have done. The Glazers couldn't afford to buy the club. Ratcliffe certainly can, and it has a lot more options for financing down the line. So I'm less concerned about that. I would expect there to be leverage somewhere, but likely not on United's books if Ratcliffe took over. Now, stadium refinancing, I think that would be different because you'd refinance against the asset. So let's just say they rebuild Old Trafford at 800 to £1 billion. I mean, looking at similar sized stadiums in the US where they've done a real refurbishment, it's about that much. Or a couple of billion for a brand new stadium. That would almost certainly leverage in order to finance that. I wouldn't be surprised at that at all, but that's okay because United would use the increased profits to afford it.
Thank you for explaining that for idiots like me.
I'm guesstimating. It's not an explanation.
Oh, okay.
Guesstimating.
Thanks for the guesstimation. The other thing I would point or remark upon as a supporter and a supporter only, there has been such a sort of political battle between United supporters, particularly over the last year since it was emerging, or the last 6 months, since it was emerging that there was a Qatari interest in owning the club, and everyone's sort of been battling with that. If there had been a solution offered 2 years ago, so it's 2 years since the Super League nonsense, so 2 years since that, and 8 or 9 months since the Glazers first put out the idea that they would sell the club. So in that period of time, if this option had been put on the table where Ratcliffe was coming in and he's a multi-billionaire, he's a United supporter, he's got all the cash, and regardless of how it's sort of refinanced, in terms of like being sensible about it, like obviously the debt has got to be dealt with in a business kind of way because it's a substantial, significant debt. But the conditions of that were that the Glazers would remain on the club books as sort of minority directors, and yes, they would have some voting rights, but there would be a new owner of the club and he would be significantly wealthy enough to either put some money in or allow the club to sort of exist on its own laurels and just sort of move forward with that. Most people would have taken that regardless of the difficulties because it was a better solution than the one that we currently have. People have got sidetracked and their heads have been switched by the idea that Qatari takeover is debt free and all that sort of stuff. I'm not here to make a judgment call on what anyone thinks about the way that they want this takeover to go. What I'm going to say is that this is another option on the table, and Glazers out, which has been the cry for 12 or 13 longer years, 20 years basically since that, so like 18 years. This is it's a strong alternative to that, and I don't want people to, or not say I don't want, because that's too strong a term for it. I just feel that I hope that people are open-minded about all the different solutions on the table. I mean, you are there because you've talked about the Glazers. We've talked about them many, many times. We've talked about the ownership of the club. And now you're talking about the restructuring of the finance in a way that, like you just put forward, makes somewhat business sense, and it's not a disaster of a situation for United to be in. And I think there's a lot of people, if offered that kind of compromise at the start of the season or at any point in the last 10 years, they would have bitten your hand off for it. And it doesn't look appealing now to some people because of the fact that City are over there with endless amounts of cash. And I just think that's not how things are supposed to be. And I still feel and hope, regardless of what the takeover, how it goes, is that United are, like it or not, we are somewhat of a political model in the British game more than any other club. I'm not saying that whether or not that ends up with us having to take the right or something that someone would say is the right or wrong way with the ownership. What I'm saying is we are seen as a political model in terms of the way that it moves forward in United operating as a football club. I'd be quite happy to see us just move on operating with the finances that we generate and without any kind of investment, even if that means new stadiums and stuff like that. Like you just said, debt might have to be taken out to build a new stadium, and that's a different conversation because I wouldn't want that. But either way, debt would have to be taken out to rebuild Old Trafford or build a new stadium completely. So again, different conversation, but debt would start to be taken out. But United, in their state of being an operating football club that doesn't have the debt leverage on it, should be able to afford that. And this kind of solution
certainly can, yeah.
And this kind of solution, ownership solution, provides that kind of end game for us. And I just think people have got embedded into the camp of it's either going to remain the Glazers, it's going to be Ratcliffe, and there's going to be even I don't even understand the argument against Ratcliffe other than that he's sort of like this middleman that is not the Qatari people, and the Qataris like wiping the deck completely, and obviously people have just abandoned every other conversation that's connected to that. And I'm not, like I said, I'm not here to have that conversation. I'm just here to say that I feel like there's a third thing on the table, and it's only come up in the last week, and I'm interested as a supporter to sort of see and lead where it goes because we don't know enough about it yet. And it's interesting that it's come up this late in the day, supposedly late in the day, if we don't go to a fourth round of bids. And I think the thing what I'm hoping for is just that any kind of confusion, we're in the 27th of April, any kind of confusion is kind of cleared up pretty soon because
we've got to start planning for the summer and next season, move on. Yeah, the Qatari thing. I mean, obviously, I've been clear on that. In my personal point of view, I don't think that United should be a tool of a state's foreign policy, and that's what the club would be. So, to somehow pretend that just because you have unlimited wealth, that and you have to completely disassociate yourself and just say, hey, I'm just going to focus on the entertainment and not worry about like where and how that is happening, which we haven't done for the last 17, 18 years, right? We've been worried. We've been very focused on the owners because they're shitty owners who brought a leveraged model to the club, and that's impacted the club, right? And we are very worried about the owners. And if you're going to say, well, hey, now we got unlimited money in this hypothetical scenario of the Qataris owning the club, that's we don't care about that anymore because we just want the unlimited money and we're just going to focus on the entertainment. And for me, that's a circle I cannot square. As alongside thinking that state ownership in football is a real cancer, whatever state, and then add on top a state with a really dodgy rights record. And I think these things are an absolute no-no for me. I understand that other people don't feel like that and happy to kind of compartmentalize, and I may be being generous there. Who knows? I mean, if it's just about the deepest pockets, the Qataris, and it is a state bid, obviously have the deepest pockets. And you'd still imagine if Joel and Avram can let go of their ego, that they'll sell there because that's going to be the largest bid. There was another report this week that said, as part of the fourth round of bids or the final round of bids, I mean, who knows, that the parties, as part of the kind of KYC process, had to demonstrate the provenance of their money. So, and this is very typical, right? Show me you got the money, show me where it came from. That'd be interesting, wouldn't it? Where does a middle manager at a mid-sized bank get £6 billion from exactly?
Yeah.
I wonder.
Jerry Maguire coming out. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I don't know. But it all stinks of the same sort of stuff that like happened with the Newcastle process and stuff like that. Do you know? Can you prove that you're disassociated? And they were, well, we are, and they're like, oh, okay, then. Did you know? Oh, I don't know. It's just
I know. I mean, the ridiculousness of Newcastle currently arguing as part of the Live Golf. Sorry, the Saudis currently arguing as part of the Live Golf lawsuit in the US that they are in fact a state actor. This is the Public Investment Fund, and therefore should be given immunity as a result because they're a state actor. When they gave, quote unquote, legal assurances to the Premier League that they are not a state actor. Absolutely amazing two-facedness there.
And
all right.
And the Premier League's kind of thing is like, oh, well, it happened then. It's like, it doesn't matter now. It's just...
I mean, they are like, well, I don't know what you're talking about, mate. I haven't heard anything about that. We've got a game at the weekend against Aston Villa, who have enjoyed something of a renaissance under Unai Emery, who's proving once again that he's a good manager.
Yeah, and they've got that goalkeeper that everyone likes. No, he's done a great job, Emery. A really, really good job to take over from what he inherited from Gerrard and get them. I mean, I don't want to be condescending. I think they're seriously challenging for a Champions League spot, and I think that's fair to say.
Sure, if they beat us at the weekend, they'll be 3 points behind. That's seriously challenging.
So I think that's fair to say that they're in that position, and that's all down to him in his management. I think he's done great there, and whether or not that's sustainable, whether or not it's a sign of a sort of flagging league in general. But you've still got to give the managers credit for the improvement that they bring upon the teams, especially when we've had so much fun in rejoicing in the decline of other managers in the league. So you've got to give credit where it's due. And he'd only just taken over when we played against them in November, hadn't he? And they battered us. And they're going to come to Old Trafford. Did they win Old Trafford last season, or did they drew Old Trafford? There was a last minute penalty from Bruno, which went into the Stretford end, so maybe they won. Maybe they won.
I'm totally blanking. Was that a 1-0 win for them?
Yeah, I think the big guy scored it from a corner quite near the end, and then we had the penalty, and then blazed it over.
Well, they've won 8 of their last 10 in the Premier League.
Yeah, so they're going to come. The thing is that they're going to come with fearlessness. You know, it doesn't matter how they play. So they're not going to play to shut up shop and get a point, because there's no point in that. They're going to play for the win. They're going to try and sense the vulnerabilities that they know that United have got. They do have a fair bit of pace and physicality in the side.
Yeah, Watkins scoring goals super quick.
And they're going to come to Old Trafford and give us a game. I know that they said Garnacho is soon to be back in the squad, so that's a sort of good dimension.
Soon to be back in the squad just in time to go off to the Under-20 World Cup.
Yeah, but we might get
been confirmed that he's going.
We might get a game out of him before he goes, and if he does, we've got to give him game time. Otherwise, how can he prove he's fit to go? Wow. So he might be in the squad of the weekend, and that might give us a dimension to provide something different to what we have been doing. Having said that, I mean, I do think, all things considered, even tonight, I think Sean Lindelof, by and large, as a combination and as individuals, when they've been asked to play in the middle all throughout the season, I'm going to say I think they've been exceptional, both of them. I think as a partnership, they've done way more than we could have expected.
I don't think it was their fault tonight. I mean, United gave up 18 shots. I think that came from midfield, mostly, giving up that many shots. So
yeah. So
different challenge against Watkins and Wendy. I'm not sure who else will play there. They played with McGinn and Ramsey at the weekend, but we'll see. But they've been playing well, Villa. They haven't scored tons of goals, although they managed to beat Newcastle 3-0 the other week, didn't they? It will be a different challenge again.
Well, I will say this about them, is that where Newcastle looked like they could go and go, like when they played against Spurs, when you saw them, you were surprised at them being 5-0 up in 5 minutes, but you kind of weren't surprised by the intensity. Whereas Villa have got that propensity to drop off, possibly. Do you know what I mean? Now they're in they're shooting a little bit higher than what they're probably out of the comfort zone in terms of where they expect it to be. So maybe that's where we catch them off. Like, yeah, they battered Newcastle, but that's Newcastle are still the side who are above the means. If that's not being, I'm not saying that to be condescending. I just mean that they are probably above what even they expected to be this season, considering the drop off of Chelsea and Spurs. So they've got the Champions League spot based on the underperformance of other teams, as well might we. But Villa, I think, are that kind of team who normally should be below us and below Newcastle and below Chelsea and below Spurs. So where they've got that kind of little bit in the middle, I feel like that's possibly a good opportunity for us to take them at the weekend, that they might get a little bit overconfident, and that I hope that Ten Hag is probably looking at them and saying, all right, there haven't been bad results in the last week, but we haven't won in 3 games, and you really need to pull one out of the bag here. And if we do pull one out of the bag, and it's 4 points from these 2 games, that is effectively Champions League spot.
Sure, yeah. A win would pretty much do it, I think. There's a lot of red flags hanging over this one for me. I mean, the injuries in the squad, the state of fatigue in the squad. I think all of this it does not look good. There's a lot of alarms going off given Villa's form at the moment, and somehow Ten Hag he's got 2 days basically to get them sorted for this one against a smart, canny manager who is able to come up with particular tactical approaches to solve problems again and again and again. Emery,
are you a fan of league? I know this one's a bit different because we played on Sunday night and we went to extra time, so we're probably grateful for it. League games being played on Thursday nights, because the Chelsea game's going to be played on a Thursday night as well. Yeah. And I'm like, all right, it's a bit of a fun stick to beat us with when we're like in the Europa. That's the consequence of getting in the Europa. You get the piss taken out of you because you're playing on Thursday nights. That's not fair.
I'm not a fan. I mean, I suppose Ten Hag was probably grateful after having a away game at Sevilla and then 120 minutes in the Cup to get that extra day. It just means a day less for the weekend game. So,
yeah, well, it's what it is. But I would say that if we're not prepared for that, and we were good in the first half today. We were really good in the first half. It's just that we're coming down to minor quibbles, right? If we're saying that United didn't score 3-0, we didn't score 3 at Spurs to win the game. We did put away with 3 goals. Then, yeah, all right, you are looking at the players for that. You're pointing squarely at them. But it's a bit of a better problem than what we had a year ago when we're saying, we just got battered and we don't even got battered 5 or 4 at what it was at Brighton, and we didn't know where the team was going to go from there. I'm not saying you have to compare every sort of little stone to where we were under Ralph Rangnick, but what I'm saying is everything, when I've said this so many times, when we're analysing everything in a microcosm of a game or passages of a game and criticising, and we still are criticising, bloody gets, how dare you concede a goal in a game of football? But we do that, and it's easy to lose sight of the bigger picture, and that's why I've been trying to say, it's a decent draw, and the good thing to take out of it was that the manager is fairly ruthless, and he will be making those ruthless calls if he's got the sort of backing to be able to do that. So
and the players. All right, well, let's see. Good luck at the weekend, lads. Thanks, Wayne. Are you hanging out with any celebs like, I don't know, Martin Edwards this week?
Oh yeah, that's a good one. Thanks, Ed. No, I was actually it was a former players dinner, former players dinner, the AFMOP, Association of Former United Players.
Right.
If you can support them, I think they are a registered charity actually, and they've got a website, and that is the former players, and I think a lot of medical stuff is if it's not covered by the PFA, the AFMOP step in to sort of deal with stuff like that, and they are. I mean, they do a massive service to the. We're talking the lads who came in after Munich and stuff like that. So loads of players who might generally be forgotten by the United community who were nonetheless massively vital for for the club. They're kind of donations. They help towards stuff like that. So anyway,
well, because we forget, like, players make 100, 200, 300 grand a week now, and you know, even 30 years ago they wouldn't have made a 10% of that.
Yeah, they could put like a tiny levy, like a 1% levy on the wages, and put that back into the former Players Association. And I don't think that would be unfair. And I think it would make a significant difference to the lives of a lot of players who, like, they probably, not probably, we're talking about legends who've achieved legendary status in a way that, without wanting to be unfair, that this current squad aren't going to be able to do. And I'm not just, I'm not doing things like, say, modern money and all that sort of stuff. But what I'm saying is they do an invaluable service. Anyway, great. The point is, Martin Edwards was the guest of honour last week because they were recognising his service as chairman. And I got a picture with Alan Keegan because I like Alan Keegan. I love him to bits. He's great. And he roped me in for the picture with Martin. And Martin's been very kind about my writing, so no matter what anyone says, he's been nice to me. And if someone's nice to you, that's all that matters in this world.
I'm sure it'll be a bestseller when you write Farty Martin's biography, and maybe you'll reveal what happened exactly in those bogs all those years ago. No, I'm being cruel to you. Poor Wayne. It's a podcast, so you can't see it. He's like, I'm not going to say anything here. While I'm yanking his chain firmly. Thanks for listening, everyone. See you soon.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.